Revenge with Karen.
I knew something was off when the lawyer paused before reading the last clause of Charles Renner's will. His lip twitched like he was holding in a cough or a confession. We were all sitting in that sterile glass conference room, half dressed for grief, half waiting to see who'd get what from the old man's empire. The HR director was dabbing at her eyes like she'd actually liked him. Graham Weller, interim CEO, walking resentment with hair gel, kept pretending to be solemn, but the corners of his mouth twitched like a man about to win a bet he rigged himself. Then the clause hit. To Mary Elizabeth Trent, I leave my 51% controlling shares, conditional upon her successfully managing Branch 14 for 30 calendar days, with no increase in operating budget or structural authority. If she restores operational continuity and exposes any deliberate mismanagement, her appointment as controlling shareholder is final and irrevocable. Dead silence, like the oxygen got yanked out of the room. Graham let out a single breathless laugh, leaned back in his chair, and muttered, "So, a mercy clause. That branch chews up managers for lunch. You'll be back in 2 weeks, 3 if the cockroaches are merciful." Someone at the back of the room whispered, "Branch 14? Isn't that the one where the HVAC caught fire last year, twice?" I didn't blink. Crack, just nodded once and said, "I accept." Inside, my stomach folded in on itself like a bad spreadsheet formula, because Branch 14 wasn't just a dumpster fire. It was the dumpster, on fire, rolling downhill into a gas leak. The old man had left me a riddle in a Molotov cocktail. Everyone thought it was humiliation, a last little jab from a CEO who never quite trusted my instincts. But Charles didn't do things accidentally. Man once sued his own board for hosting a strategy offsite without an agenda. This wasn't punishment. This was a challenge wrapped in kerosene, and I just lit the match. Hey, quick pause before we head deeper into the wreckage. If you're one of the 95% who listens to stories like this without subscribing, now's the time. Seriously, it's one click, and it keeps the lights on for the folks behind the curtain who help bring these tales to life. Also hit like if you've ever had to fix a mess you didn't create. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this one unfolds. Back to the disaster. The next morning, I was issued a temporary badge and a borrowed company laptop that still had a sticker reading property of finance, "Do not reassign." I wasn't even given a parking spot. Graham was already on a PR tour, leaking to the press that the transition team was in place, and Renner's estate remains committed to legacy continuity. Translation: he thought I'd fail and fast, and he wanted plausible deniability ready before my ashes cooled. Branch 14 was located in a crumbling office park, wedged between a defunct palace and a dialysis clinic. When I walked in, the lobby smelled like over-microwaved fish and toner. Receptionist looked up like I was the ghost of unpaid invoices. She blinked once and said, "You're the temp director." Something like that, I said, "Mary Trent." Her eyes widened like, "That Mary?" I just smiled. "Do I need a helmet or a fire extinguisher?" She didn't laugh, just handed me a visitor badge. "You'll want both." That's how I was welcomed to the most dysfunctional branch in the company. A place where the lights flickered like a horror movie. The breakroom fridge had a lock and a sign-out sheet, where the whiteboards were still covered in project names from 2019, and not a single soul had the courage to erase them. The elevator was out. I took the stairs. By the time I reached the top floor, I'd passed a broken shredder, 2 employees watching TikToks with the volume on, and a man asleep under his desk with a "Do Not Disturb" working remotely sign taped to his shoe. This wasn't incompetence. This was curated decay. And I hadn't even opened the books yet. The lights in the hallway buzzed like they were trying to confess something. My heels clicked against warped linoleum that hadn't seen a mop since the Obama administration. The thermostat was blinking an error code that looked like Morse code for run. A box fan wheezed in the corner, pointed at nothing. Welcome to Branch 14, where motivation came to die and took the copier with it. The front desk was unmanned. Post-it note on the monitor read, "Back in 5-ish, dated last Tuesday." A stack of HR complaints sat under a paperweight shaped like a middle finger. I picked one up, requesting a formal investigation into Steve microwaving tuna again during lunch rush. Repeat offense. Emotional distress cited. Another one, "Please fix the printer before someone throws it out the window." Again. Then I found the one that made me stop mid-step. Simply read, "Have we officially given up on pretending this place works?" I made my way to the so-called leadership wing. Empty offices, dusty nameplates, One door had been kicked in and reattached using duct tape and something that looked suspiciously like chewing gum. Another office had a motivational poster hanging upside down. Teamwork makes the dream work. The dream, apparently, was rot. Only 2 of the supposed 5 department heads were in the building. Both looked at me like I was the newest contestant on a hidden camera show. The first one, Angela from procurement, said, "Oh, so they did send someone. Good luck, I guess," before walking away mid-sentence to yell at someone about a double-booked conference room that didn't have chairs. The second one, Lewis, head of logistics, barely looked up from his screen. "Don't worry," he mumbled. "We're not usually this bad." Printer in the hallway let out a dying groan and spit out a blank page. The turnover board in HR was a whiteboard with names scratched out in red marker, and under it, someone had written, "Abandon all hope ye who on board here." It took me 3 hours to get Wi-Fi credentials, 4 to get access to the drive folders. IT support was remote only, but no one remembered the password to log a ticket. Last ticket was labeled, "Can we replace the rats with something less judgmental?" I spent the rest of the day digging into departmental outputs, just trying to figure out what this place did. One department, operations integration, had no measurable KPIs. No projects, no tickets, but it had a vendor budget north of $280,000 last quarter, and according to payroll, they had 9 full-time employees. I only saw one guy in there who was asleep on an ergonomic ball chair, wearing noise-canceling headphones and a shirt that read, "I'm just here for the snacks." I opened their shared folder, blank. The only file was a Word doc titled "Stuff We Should Probably Do Someday." I opened it, empty. What was this place? I started making notes. Quietly, no announcements, no grand speeches. Just opened a fresh notebook, paper, not digital, and labeled the first page, "Broken Things." By 7:13 p.m., I had logged 14 malfunctions, 6 missing personnel, 3 vendor overpayments, 1 mislabeled invoice for janitorial supplies, sent to a P.O. box that no one could confirm existed, and at least 2 cases of potential embezzlement if you squinted hard enough and believed in miracles. Oh, and someone had replaced the coffee machine with a Keurig knockoff that only brewed hot vinegar. Found a note taped to it, "Do not speak to me until I've had my cup of disappointment." I sat down in the only chair that didn't squeak like a dying pig and just stared at the chaos. The kind of chaos that doesn't come from laziness, it's the kind that's engineered, carefully, strategically. The kind that keeps you so busy chasing rats you don't realize the floorboards are missing. Graham knew. Hell, maybe he built it. But I wasn't there to fix a bad office. I was there to figure out why someone wanted it to stay broken. So I stayed late. Opened a spreadsheet. Labeled it "Unexplained Vendors." Pulled up expense reports, vendor codes, employee IDs. The numbers didn't add up. Then again, I wasn't here to balance anything. I was here to blow it up. At 6:04 a.m., I brewed my own coffee at home, strong enough to melt linoleum. Opened my inbox to the latest dump of expense reports from the last 4 quarters. I didn't bother dressing corporate. No one at Branch 14 noticed when I showed up in sneakers and a hoodie. My only accessory was a steel trap memory and a personal spreadsheet I was now calling the Ledger of Lies. The first thing that slapped me in the face was the janitorial contract. Vendor, Blakeland Maintenance Services, monthly fee, $12,000. Line item, routine janitorial and sanitation services, contract start, 18 months ago. $12,000 every month for what? The bathrooms smelled like a haunted truck stop. Half the office had resorted to bringing their own Lysol. I'd never seen a mop, a uniform, or so much as a whiff of disinfectant. I cornered Angela from procurement in the hallway, asked her point blank, "Have you ever seen someone from Blakeland?" She looked up from her stress ball, blinked once and said no, but the invoices always go through. Then she dropped her voice. And the last guy who questioned vendor payments got transferred to the Cleveland branch, 3 hours from his house. He quit 2 weeks later. I opened the contract folder for Blakeland. The signature line was blurry. The contract had no W-9, no IN, and the listed business address was a UPS store in Newark. I called the number on file. Straight to voicemail. Message said, "You've reached building services." No company name, no human name, just static. Next up, payroll. I requested the access pass logs for the last 12 months and cross-referenced them with the active employee list. 47 people were on payroll. That seemed high, given I'd seen maybe 18 warm bodies in the building. 7 of the names had 0 badge-ins for the entire year. Not one login, no email activity, no Teams messages. Nada. One of them, D. Ramirez, was supposedly working in ops integration, the same department with 0 projects and a $280K vendor budget. Ramirez's salary, $84,000 annually. Health insurance fully covered. Gym stipend. I tried emailing. Bounce-a-back. Called the number. Disconnected. Asked Lewis if he'd ever met Ramirez. He squinted. Think I saw him once, maybe at the holiday party, or was that the guy from shipping? Was no shipping department. I printed the full payroll list and grabbed a red Sharpie. Started crossing off names I couldn't verify. One by one, ghost salaries emerged like oil on water. Quiet, slippery fraud hiding behind benign HR reports. The kind of thing only someone on the inside could maintain. At 2:11 p.m., while I was scanning a 5th invoice that somehow had the exact same timestamp as one from 6 months earlier. Someone copy-pasted and forgot to change the date. My office door creaked open. It was Deborah, the senior admin. 62 years old, sharp eyes behind bifocals, and a stare that had seen generations of bull get recycled through corporate reorgs. She didn't come in, just stood in the doorway. I see what you're doing, she said, voice low. You're smart, but don't go too deep. I raised an eyebrow. Too deep into what? She glanced over her shoulder. Back at me? They always make examples out of anyone who asks too many questions. I let the silence hang there like smoke. Who's they, Deborah? But she was already gone. By 6:23 p.m., I'd built a shadow org chart based on badge access, email traffic, and Slack activity. It looked nothing like the official version. People who were marked as reporting to had no interaction with their managers. Vendors with recurring payments had no contact names. One consulting firm had submitted the same invoice template 17 times with only the date changed, and no one had noticed. Or maybe someone had noticed, and approved it anyway. The deeper I went, the more the patterns revealed themselves, like rats dancing in sync. Someone was laundering money through Branch 14, a lot of it, and I just yanked back the curtain. I sat there in the dim light of my office, fingers sore from typing, red Sharpie dead from overuse. Somewhere in the distance, someone was microwaving fish again. A passive-aggressive note slid under my door. Mind your business, too late. I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote 4 words in all caps: ghosts, grift, gamble, game, and then I underlined it. Twice. Gary liked to think of himself as the heartbeat of Branch 14. Which, if you were being honest, was probably true if the heart was mostly cholesterol and misfiled invoices. His office was positioned dead center of the floor plan, like a little moldy throne room surrounded by chaos. Half glass walls, half ego shrine. A dead succulent sat on the windowsill next to a mug that said, I don't rise and grind, I rant and recline. Behind his desk were 3 monitors, none of which showed anything resembling work. One had a paused game of solitaire. Another had Reddit open. The third, security feeds split-screened, watching. Always watching. I waited until mid-afternoon, when the office had thinned out and the HVAC unit was rattling like it was coughing up secrets. Got a second? I asked, stepping into his cave. He didn't look up. I'm booked. I pulled the guest chair back with a loud scrape and sat anyway. This won't take long. That got his attention. His eyes finally met mine, blue, bloodshot, and radiating that particular shade of smug you usually only find in regional managers and mall cops. So, been looking into our vendor contracts. I started, voice calm, even. Blakeland Maintenance in particular. They've been billing us $12K a month for janitorial services, but there's no documented service logs. No contact person. The number on the invoice is disconnected. He leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head. It's been vetted. Finance approves it. Finance approves what they're given, I said, and the file has no supporting documentation, not even a W-9. Maybe it's filed elsewhere. I nodded, sure, maybe. Same with the 7 ghost employees. Something flickered in his expression then. Just a flash like a blown fuse sparking before it dies. You're digging in places you don't belong, Mary. Funny. I thought as acting branch manager, my job was to dig. He leaned forward now, smile fading. You're temporary. Don't get cute. They've sent other people before you. Think you're special because the old man gave you a scavenger hunt in his will. He chuckled, dry and humorless. You're a footnote. You'll leave like the rest. I stood slow, maybe, but I document as I go. He scoffed. You really think anyone reads reports from Branch 14? I don't write them for them, I said, turning toward the door. I write them for court. He didn't respond. just spun slowly in his chair like a lazy roulette wheel, watching me leave. At night, after the office emptied out and the sun dipped below the flickering parking lot lights, I stayed behind. Just me, the buzz of fluorescent lights, and a mug of gas station coffee that somehow tasted like despair and pennies. I opened the shared drive, where I'd stored all my audit notes. Every file, every vendor crosscheck, every ghost employee log, every red-flagged payment trail. All carefully sorted into folders titled things like questionable contracts, payroll anomalies, and definitely not legal. The folders were there, but they were empty, every single file gone, replaced by a single document named README. I opened it. You were warned, that was it. I sat still for a long moment, not angry, not shocked, just quiet. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out my USB backup, plugged it in, restored everything, in triplicate. And this time I stored backups on 3 separate encrypted folders, one in the cloud under a decoy project name, one buried under a fake intern's directory labeled onboarding tips, and one emailed to a trusted friend outside the company with the subject line, in case I disappear. When I finished, I opened a blank notepad file. Typed, first breach. Timestamp logged. Retaliation confirmed. Then I printed the README, walked it over to the printer that still worked, and taped it to the office fridge. No note. No context. Let them wonder who else was watching. Later, as I walked past Gary's office, I noticed the security cam feed had been switched off. The monitors were dark. The door was ajar, but the air smelled like cheap cologne and fear. This wasn't just laziness anymore. This was a system built to collapse under inspection. I headed home that night not rattled, but sharpened, like a blade meeting the whetstone. I wasn't just digging now, I was hunting. Fire extinguisher near the break room was tagged for service in 2018. The emergency exit in the east stairwell had a vending machine shoved in front of it. The first aid kit was missing the actual first aid, just bandages, no antiseptic, no gloves, no instruction manual, and for some reason, a pack of expired breath mints. By 9:40 a.m. that Thursday, I'd seen enough to trigger what I called a good old-fashioned panic test, kind of thing corporate loves to talk about in training videos, but hasn't actually simulated since the Bush administration. I sent out a building-wide email titled, "Surprise Safety Drill, All Staff Participation Required Immediately." Lewis from Logistics replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. Angela sent, "Is this a joke?" HR didn't respond at all. I pulled the fire alarm. It didn't go off. No blinking lights. No siren. Not even a chirp. Hallway lights flickered, but I think that was just the ceiling begging for death. I picked up the building maintenance log and flipped to the most recent entries. System tested, okay, date 2 weeks ago. Signed Gary L. I stared at the signature. Same loopy cursive he used to sign his passive-aggressive memos, but I'd just tested the system. The alarm was dead. The sprinklers, drier than corporate empathy. I checked the panel box, manual override disabled. Hadn't been wired properly in years. I marched straight to the server room, where the battery backups were supposed to be maintained per quarterly safety protocol. The door was propped open with a stapler. The inside temp read 92 degrees. One of the fans was buzzing like a dying wasp. There were no backup logs, just a sticky note that said "Don't unplug," and a half-eaten granola bar melted onto the floor. This wasn't just neglect. It was fraud by laziness. Paper trail so doctored it should have had a medical license. I went back to my office, locked the door, pulled up the company bylaws, specifically the original incorporation charter that Charles Renner himself had co-written back in 1998. I'd read it twice in my first week, because Charles wasn't just a CEO, he was a contract nerd, a man who once delayed a product launch because the font on the EULA was too flirty. There, buried in the middle of the bylaws, right after the provisions for third-party arbitration and employee intellectual property clauses, was Clause 2.14. In the event of suspected facilities-based risk or safety noncompliance, any acting site director retains discretionary authority to initiate a compliance audit via a third-party entity without requiring central office approval, provided documentation of said risk is supplied. Bingo. Attached photos, screenshots, temp logs, the vending machine barricading the emergency exit. A 42-second video of the fire alarm doing absolutely nothing while I stood there, deadpan, holding a lit match next to the sensor. I sent the packet to the audit vendor still under contract from our last HQ inspection, One Charles had insisted we keep on retainer in case of shenanigans. Within hours, I got a call from HQ Risk and Compliance. Voice I didn't recognize said, "Mary, this audit wasn't pre-approved. You need to cancel the request immediately." I leaned back, sipping lukewarm coffee from a mug that said "World's Okayest Manager," and replied, Clause 2.14. Site-level discretion in the event of suspected risk. A long pause. Then, "That clause hasn't been invoked in over a decade." "Then it's overdue," I said, and hung up. 10 minutes later, my access badge pinged red on the elevator. Someone at HQ had tried to soft-lock me out. I walked to the stairwell, around the vending machine, took the stairs to the IT office, and re-enabled my admin clearance using a maintenance terminal I'd quietly kept logged in since day one. Whoever thought I'd fold clearly hadn't read the fine print. By 4:22 p.m., I had a confirmation email from the third-party auditor. They'd be arriving Monday. Subject line read, Branch 14, Discretionary Risk Trigger Compliance Site Visit Approved. I printed it, taped it to my window. The next morning, Gary didn't show up. His out-of-office reply read, "On PTO indefinitely. Please redirect all facilities questions to Central Operations," which didn't exist. By noon, rumors were swirling. Someone asked if we were being shut down. Someone else whispered that a compliance probe meant layoffs. Receptionist finally removed the back in 5-ish note. I didn't say a word. I just added 2 more items to my documentation list. Tampered safety logs, unauthorized access override attempt, and underneath, in pen, "They're sweating." Good. The call came in at 7:47 p.m. on a Saturday. I was sitting on the floor of my living room, a glass of flat Diet Coke in one hand, vendor receipts spread across the carpet like a tarot reading from hell. My dog-eared notebook sat open beside me, covered in so many red ink scrawls it looked like I'd graded Satan's taxes. I was down to decoding what looked like duplicate payments to a vendor called Circa Solutions, except the second invoice spelled it Circa. Same formatting, same address, different tax ID. Lazy fraud, sloppy greed, almost disappointing. My cell buzzed, unknown caller. I let it ring twice. Picked up. Said nothing, Mary. Graham's voice hissed through the line like a venomous snake in a Bluetooth headset. "Are you seriously pulling this crap?" I stayed quiet. "I know you initiated a third-party compliance audit," he continued, rage barely masked under faux professionalism. "You had no authority to do that." Still said nothing. "You're going off script," he snapped. That caught me. Off script. My spine straightened. The room got colder. "You were supposed to smile, take a few photos with the sad staff, at their heads, then quit after a week," he sneered. "That office was supposed to stay broken." My thumb slid across the screen, recording on. I still didn't speak, just let the silence stretch. Graham exhaled sharply, mistaking my pause for fear. "Look, I get it. You're playing Sherlock because Charles left you a little Easter egg. Cute. But this is a bad look for the company. You're kicking up dust that doesn't need kicking." I heard a lighter flick, followed by a drag and exhale. Cheap cigar, probably. Something that came with a free golf bag if you bought enough boxes. "You think the board's gonna thank you for this?" he said, tone shifting from anger to smug. "You're one audit away from getting quietly shuffled back to HR. They already see you as a legacy asset, a ghost from Renner's paranoid years." Legacy asset. That stung more than I'd admit out loud. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. "You want to play executive hero, be my guest," went on, "but just know you're not protected anymore. Charles is gone. Nobody's got your back." I finally spoke. "You finished?" Graham paused. "Excuse me?" I asked if you were done. I repeated, dead calm. "Because I'm trying to figure out if I should laugh now or wait for the transcript to do it for me." He hesitated. "Transcript?" I didn't explain, just ended the call. Then I stared at the recording interface. Pressed save to external. Labeled it, Weller Call 6 unedited WAV, copied it to a USB. Backed it up to cloud storage under a folder named Q2 Presentations. Then again to a personal drive labeled Aunt Linda's Recipes, just for flavor. And still, for good measure, I emailed a copy to myself using a burner account I'd created that morning when I started digging into the Circa mystery. The subject line: "In case of sudden termination," the next day. I walked into Branch 14 like it was just another Monday. The sky was gray, the coffee was burnt, the elevator still hadn't been fixed, but something in the air had shifted. Lewis met me in the hallway, eyes darting. "Hey, there's talk that someone from legal might be coming down." "From HQ? Good," I said. "They can use the safety stairwell. I just had the vending machine removed." He looked at me like I'd grown fangs. Angela stopped me in the kitchenette. The hell's going on? Everyone's acting like we're about to get raided. Are we? I asked, voice neutral. She blinked. Aren't you the one who would know? I offered a half smile. Let me know if HR starts passing out blindfolds. In my office, I opened the drive. Added a new folder, Confessions Accidental inside. I dropped the audio file. Then I sat back, cracked my knuckles, and wrote a single line across my legal pad. He said it out loud. I underlined it. Day Graham cracked his polished mask was the day I stopped playing defense. The internal auditor arrived at 9:03 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday, wearing a trench coat like he was auditioning for a noir film. Clipboard in one hand, tablet in the other, and an expression that screamed I skipped breakfast for this. His name was Neil Takashi, quiet, clinical, the kind of guy who wore orthopedic shoes but kept steel in his spine. He didn't shake hands, didn't introduce himself to the staff. He walked straight into my office, closed the door, and said, "Show me everything." I didn't start with the janitor invoices or the fake employees. I started with the funnel. A long chain of vendor payments routed through non-critical operations, billed to shell companies with vague names like Vyerk Strategic and Northram Partners. All of them listed addresses that traced back to strip mall P.O. boxes or virtual office suites in cities that had nothing to do with our operating zones. Each invoice followed the same pattern. Padded line items, identical formatting, and signatures that looked like they were made with a shaky stylus. The totals varied just enough to avoid suspicion, but consistent enough to prove automated fraud. $8,450, $8,465, $8,460, each just beneath the $8,500 threshold that triggered automated flags. Then I showed him the ghosts, 7 employees drawing full salaries, health benefits, and stipends, none of whom had badged in, logged on, or even existed in meeting records for over a year. Some had linked in profiles that hadn't been updated since 2019 and had a company laptop still listed as pending pickup. The others had entries signed off by a former HR director who'd retired last spring and now worked in, surprise, Graham Weller's old division. Next, I dropped the falsified profit and loss statements, quarterlies that had been adjusted for performance smoothing, which was a euphemism I traced back to a Slack message from a former finance analyst who'd since moved to a yoga retreat in Costa Rica. Spreadsheets looked clean at a glance, but formulas were hidden. When unmasked, they linked to off-tab calculations that pulled from the same inflated vendor data I'd flagged. Smoke and mirrors, wrapped in pastel-colored pie charts. Neil didn't say a word the entire time, just tapped on his tablet, occasionally squinting like something smelled bad, and it wasn't just the break room fridge, which, for the record, was still emitting something green and self-aware. At the end of the review, I slid one last folder across the desk. The audio file, Graham's voice dripping with arrogance that office was supposed to stay broken. Neil listened with wired earbuds, not Bluetooth. Old school. When it ended, he unplugged, took off his glasses, and said quietly, "This is substantial. That's a polite word for it." He nodded once, packed up his notes, and left without another word. No announcement, no update, just vanished like a ghost into the rain. The next morning, things began to shift. Angela stopped calling the place a corpse with Wi-Fi. Lewis put in a request for new logistics software through proper procurement. Deborah, the admin who warned me weeks ago, dropped off a coffee on my desk with no note, just a nod. The break room had actual food again. Someone threw out the old milk. Someone else labeled the fridge shelves by department. The passive-aggressive post-its vanished overnight. At 3:16 p.m., I caught 2 junior staffers whispering in the stairwell. "She's serious. Like she's actually cleaning this place out. Think they'll shut us down? No, she's too smart for that." They froze when they saw me. I didn't interrupt. Just nodded once, kept walking. By week's end, someone fixed the badge reader at the main entrance. HR finally updated the org chart to reflect real, present employees. In a move so shocking it nearly made me drop my pen, someone replaced the expired breath mints in the first aid kit with actual medical supplies. A heartbeat had returned to the building. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They didn't cheer. They didn't throw a parade, but the glances had changed. No more eye rolls, just that subtle shift in posture. Like a battered crew realizing the ship might actually stay afloat. And me? I kept my head down, added every whisper, every anomaly, every silent ripple to my growing report. The storm wasn't over. But for the first time, I wasn't alone in the boat. The 30 days came faster than I expected, but not because time flew. Time at Branch 14 didn't fly. It dragged, sputtered, and occasionally collapsed on itself like a wounded animal. But when it was finally up, I found myself standing in the HQ lobby in a blazer that still smelled faintly of toner and fluorescent despair, holding a sealed manila envelope with enough documentation to drown a small government. The receptionist offered me a nervous smile. She probably wasn't used to anyone showing up from Branch 14 that didn't look like they were fresh out of a hostage negotiation. "Conference room C," she said. "They're all waiting." Of course they were. When I stepped inside, it was like stepping onto a theater stage. Polished wood table, sparkling water bottles, overpriced ergonomic chairs, the kind with built-in lumbar support and zero moral backbone. The board was already seated, all 9 members in suits so tailored they could have doubled as burial shrouds. At the far end sat him, Graham Weller, interim CEO, grinning like the prom king at a funeral. "Mary," he said, standing as if to welcome me. "So glad you made it. We've all been very curious to hear how your little field trip went." I didn't shake his hand, didn't smile, didn't speak. Just took my seat, he kept going. Now, obviously, we all appreciated Charles Renner's dramatic flair, and I'll admit, asking you to oversee Branch 14 was certainly one of his more creative inheritance conditions. But let's not forget, the clause stipulated operational continuity under existing budget constraints, which, as we all know, is near impossible. He turned to the board. It's no secret the branch was a liability long before this. The door opened. Everyone turned. In walked Neil Takashi, the internal auditor, wearing the same trench coat, same emotionless expression. Graham blinked. "Excuse me, this is a closed session." Neil didn't respond, just nodded at me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Thick, sealed in red tape, my initials across the flap. I slid it across the table to the general counsel. No speech. Graham smirked. "Come on, Mary. After 30 days of roughing it with the printer peasants, surely you've got something to say." I looked at him, really looked. The man who thought power meant proximity, who believed silence meant weakness, who assumed every broken light bulb and every ghost's salary was insulation between him and consequences. I tapped the envelope once. "Everything is in there." Legal opened it. A silence settled like fresh snow. Inside, a printed report, 146 pages, labeled Branch 14 Audit Summary, authored by Emmy. Trent attached. A USB drive labeled Confidential Wire Transfer Records showing duplicate vendor payments, a side-by-side comparison of falsified P&L reports, internal messages referencing controlled underperformance, the audio recording of Graham's call. That office was supposed to stay broken. Neil cleared his throat and produced his own folder. "For the record, my findings confirm Miss Trent's documentation. The scope and pattern of mismanagement exceed negligence." This was coordinated. The air snapped. The board chair leaned forward. Coordinated by whom? Neil didn't answer. He just looked at Graham. Graham tried to laugh. "Wait, you're not seriously saying this is a setup? You think his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The general counsel flipped to the final page of my report. She read the closing line aloud. Operational continuity restored. Mismanagement no longer theoretical. Silence again. Then the board chair turned to the lawyer seated beside him. "Is this enough to trigger the second clause?" She nodded. "Yes. Clause 7.3b. In the event that fraud or coordinated sabotage is uncovered and remediate during the conditional management period, controlling shares transfer immediately." Graham stood. "Now hold on, this wasn't part of the chair cut him off. "Mr. Weller, please sit down." "I'm the interim CEO," where the general counsel said coldly. "Your severance is null. Misconduct voids eligibility." 2 security personnel entered quietly from the side door. Graham's face went pale. No, this is insane. This is political. This is her vendetta. You're letting a glorified branch babysitter hijack a boardroom." The chair tapped the table twice. Meeting adjourned. Graham's protests faded as the guards flanked him. He locked eyes with me one last time, red, wet, trembling with disbelief. I didn't look away, didn't blink, didn't smile. The board began rising from their seats. Papers shuffled. Water glasses clinked. No applause. Just the soft, satisfied silence of a wound cauterized. The chairwoman of the board approached me. "You're staying on?" I nodded once. "From Branch 14. For now," she paused, "that place. It's not beyond saving." I looked past her through the glass walls to the skyline beyond. No, I said, it never was. After the boardroom emptied, the air still held the echo of something permanent. Not victory, not relief, something heavier. The smell after a thunderstorm that didn't just clear the air, it rewrote the forecast. I stayed seated as they filed out, board members in tailored suits, heads down, polite nods, sidelong glances. No one said congratulations, said things like that was thorough. Or Renner was always good at picking quiet hammers, which I suppose was a compliment if you squinted. Only the general counsel remained behind, organizing documents into a sleek leather briefcase. Then came the soft knock. The door opened, and in walked Charles Renner's lawyer, Arthur Linfield, late 60s, always looked like he'd just come from a chess tournament where he'd sued the clock. He carried a red envelope, kind you only see when the dead have a few tricks left. I believe we have one more matter, he said calmly, setting the envelope on the table. The general counsel paused mid-folder. This wasn't part of the original disclosure packet. Linfield offered a thin smile. Charles preferred conditional legacies. He opened the envelope with a precision blade. Inside, a single page. He cleared his throat. The event that Mary Elizabeth Trent restores operational integrity to any division previously deemed financially unsalvageable, and successfully documents evidence of deliberate internal sabotage tied to current or interim executive leadership. Her status as controlling shareholder is to be made final and irrevocable, effective immediately upon confirmation by board or audit authority. Silence. Not stunned silence, stricken silence, kind that means a few people in the room had bet against me with inside odds. The general counsel's voice was steady, but a beat slower. The audit and investigative evidence meet those conditions. The clause is active. Linfield nodded. Then, by the stipulations of Mr. Renner's estate, the 51% voting shares are hereby transferred into Miss Trent's full control. No vesting. No contingency. Graham, who had not yet been escorted off property, because he'd locked himself in the CFO's glass-walled office like a panicked raccoon, was watching this from the hallway. I didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him. But when he burst into the boardroom uninvited, shouting, "This is insane. That clause isn't binding," legal didn't flinch. The general counsel simply turned and said, "Mr. Weller, your severance is void. You engaged in sustained misconduct. Clause 18.4c covers this." He stammered, mouth open, lips working through arguments that hadn't been useful since law school. No, this was her setup. I stood, signed the final register with Renner's old Montblanc pen, still warm from Arthur's pocket, didn't look at Graham, didn't raise my voice, just said, "I'll be working from branch 14 for the foreseeable future." That shut him up. As I left HQ, there were no cameras, no press release, just the same dingy elevator ride I'd taken up, now descending with the weight of legacy. In my bag was the USB backup of every file I'd collected. In my hand was a new badge, labeled Chair, but titles are for email signatures. When I walked through the doors of branch 14, the chaos was gone. Not polished, not perfect, but no longer rotting. The whiteboards had actual project outlines. The lights stayed on. The breakroom fridge had a weekly cleaning schedule taped to it, signed by 3 departments. Even the vending machine had been replaced, and this time it wasn't blocking the fire exit. And the people, they stood when I entered. Not stiff, formal clapping like some promotion parade. This was quiet, earnest. The kind of clapping that says thank you for seeing us, for believing this place wasn't dead weight, for pulling the knife out instead of twisting it. One of the engineers, Tarek, shy kid, brilliant with code, but always assumed he'd be invisible, stood closest to the doorway. As I passed, he said quietly, "You fixed what they broke." I paused, looked around. The hallway buzzed with the sound of actual work, not survival. I turned to him. "No," I said, "we did." And then I kept walking. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.